In the words of the great Obi-Wan Kenobi, hello there and welcome to my review. With all the uncertainty of what the near future holds, I thought instead of trying to look forwards, I thought this time I'd look backwards and take a walk down memory lane, and more specifically to 1984. So I'll be reviewing The Neverending Story. Yes, The Neverending Story. I haven't watched this film probably in about 15 years, maybe even more than that. It's been a while. So I've had a bit of an itch to watch it for a while, for a touch of nostalgia, and I was a bit apprehensive about watching it because of the way movies are now, what their level of expectations are. Going back to watching an old movie, or a classic movie, if you want to call it that, well, could it stand up the test? Could it stand the test of time? So that's what this review is going to be all about. So with that being said, my name is Jay, and this is my opinion. So I sat and watched it for the first time in quite some time, just a couple of nights ago, just to refresh my memory. I actually do own the Blu-ray version of this. I watched it on Netflix, but I actually do own the Blu-ray version, but don't actually remember ever watching it. Actually, to be fair, I don't think I even remember watching it in the widescreen format. I've got very vivid memories of watching it on VHS. Yes, VHS. As someone who's nearly 40, I remember very vividly watching many VHSs. If anyone's young is watching this, ask someone older what a VHS is, and I'm sure they'll be happy to explain it to you. So when I actually got sit down and watch it, it was kind of a mixture of excitement. It's been a long time since I watched the film. I remember loving the film, but was it as good as I remember? Seeing it through the eyes of someone who's nearly 40, rather than seeing it through the eyes of someone without as much life experience. So much to my delight, when the opening credits came up and you had all the swirling clouds and then that music, we all know the music. Anyone who's seen the movie knows a song by Lamar, The Neverending Story. And that, just seeing that and hearing that all kind of mixed into one little melting pot, sent me straight back to my childhood. And it gave me goosebumps. I had goosebumps on these hairy arms. I had goosebumps, and it got me surprisingly emotional as well. So I kind of had a feeling straight from the outset that I was gonna enjoy this viewing. As I was sitting and watching it, I started remembering the movie. It'd been a very long time since I watched it, and there were some things that I'd forgotten. But I found as I was watching it, I was remembering the next scene or remembering odd bits of dialogue, and that because I watched it a lot when I was younger. So some of it stuck, and you're seeing it through the eyes of, again, someone who's nearly 40. Not to keep harping on about it, but seeing it through the eyes of someone who's a little bit older, it had the movie had layers that I really wasn't aware were there as a younger person, because you don't, as a child, you'd see the film as face value. What you see is what you get, but there were actually surprisingly amount of layers to the movie. So the chief villain in the movie is this presence, this destructive force called the Nothing. Not a very imaginative name, but appropriate for the movie. And obviously, through the eyes of a child, you just see it for what it is. It's just something that's destroying this beautiful, fantastic world of Fantasia. But it actually represents the destruction of imagination and fantasy through kind of growing up and being, having all these adult responsibilities and not having the necessity to have such fantastic imaginations through reading or playing or anything like that. It ties in nicely to kind of how things are today, because we probably don't read as many books as maybe we should. I know I encourage it with our children, but we consume that kind of media a lot differently through audiobooks and through TV, and we don't have the horrible cancer of actually having to open a book and read it. I'm still very old-fashioned. I very much like to read a book, but we don't have that necessity to get all of our information from books anymore. So, you know, it kind of, you know, maybe a little bit deeper than some people want to read into it, but I think I think is relevant. One of the other things is that Bastian was grieving for his mother who had died. I don't remember that part of the movie. Maybe as a child, you never want to, you think about the loss of a parent or anything like that. And, you know, and the contention that he has with his father. I just always thought as a kid, his dad was a bit of a dick. But there's obviously a strain there through grief, that they're both experiencing grief. And maybe they're not connected as well as, you know, grief can either pull people together or push people apart. And it seems like they're kind of pushing each other apart. So, yeah, that was just an extra little layer that I noticed. Probably something that's a little bit more obvious, but, you know, was it real for Bastian? Did it actually happen to him? Or was it all just in his mind? Already said he's grieving, he's traumatized by the loss of his mother. So did he create this fantasy in his head? Did these things actually happen? Or was it all part of his grieving process? Deep stuff, I know. Maybe start talking about some negative things, a couple of negative things. Call them negative things, I call them observations. But there isn't much of a story to it, to be fair. The main chunk of the movie is Atreyu on a quest to find a cure for the childlike empress who is dying, and she's the only one that can stop the nothing. Yeah. Now, why the story isn't the most original and imaginative, obviously the reason people remember this film and people like to rewatch these films isn't necessarily because of the story, but it's about the characters that Atreyu meets on the way. You know, characters like Rockbiter, like Gmork, you know, the wolf dog thing, which I found as a child was pretty scary. There's Mauler, the big tortoise in the Swamp of Sadness. But we'll talk a little bit more about the Swamps of Sadness a bit later on. The small man and his racing snail. How could you not love that snail? He looks so adorable. The Nighthawk and his stupid bat, which was hilarious back in the day. And of course, Falkor, the luck dragon. The story moves along pretty fast, so unfortunately some of these characters don't have a massive amount of screen time. Except for, you know, Falkor has a little bit more than others, but that's certainly not a bad thing. God, I used to love that luck dragon. I think everyone who watched that movie as a child wanted a luck dragon for Christmas, for birthday, any day of the week. They wanted a luck dragon. I know I did. As I said, the story moves on quite quickly. You know, with the help of a bit of voiceover, they kind of skip some bits of the story. The voiceover says Atreyu's gone there, Atreyu's gone here, looking for this and looking for that, looking for a cure for the childlike empress. But I'm not sure today they could actually get away with something like that, because an audience would expect to see Atreyu's entire quest, expect him to see him going to that mountain, going into that cave, not just having a voice say, oh, he did this, by the way, but we're not going to show it to you. And there's not a lot of action. There's very little action in this movie, which again, it serves the movie fine. You know, basically it's Atreyu going from one dialogue scene to another with a little bit of walking in between. And some of the animatronics for the bigger beasties, like the Gmork and Falkor, some of the animatronics weren't that great. You know, it's 1984. You know, technology was a lot different than what it is now. Now they probably rely mostly on CGI, or at least state-of-the-art technology to make the animatronics really good. But it really does break my heart to say it, that the, you know, lip syncing with Falkor and with, you know, again with the Gmork, as using them as an examples, was not that great at all. Speaking of heartbreaking, I cannot talk about the Neverending Story without mentioning the Swamps of Sadness. That scene. Yes, I'm going to talk about it very briefly, but I'm going to talk about it. Above all else, it's probably the most memorable scene in the entire movie for all the wrong reasons. Artax the horse sinks into the Swamps of Sadness. Yeah. Poor horsey. Over to the glue factory for you. But, sorry. But the horse dies, horse is an innocent, didn't do anything wrong, but it was more, I think, of Atreyu's reaction, his performance, crying, screaming, begging this horse not to sink into the swamp, and the music, that just it just hits you where you live. And it even did when I watched it the other night. I got myself surprisingly emotional, even I'd seen it probably like at least 30 times. It still gets me even now. So, as I said at the beginning, does the movie hold up? Sadly not. Mainly for the things haven't long mentioned. So it's kind of sad to admit it, but it really doesn't hold up well against the standards that we hold today. In a climate and a world of remakes and reboots, I've said it before on a previous one. There's lots of these things being fired out even now. But could this be one of the ones that gets remade? I mean, they've sequelized the Neverending Story, and if anyone is watching this and think, oh, I'll watch the Neverending Story too, and I think there's even a third one, my recommendation is don't do it. They are very, very poor as far as sequels are concerned, and very poor movies in themselves. So please don't go and watch the sequels. It will ruin everything that is great about the first one. But the Neverending Story, there's so much backstory that could be explained or expanded on. So, maybe a reboot wouldn't be such a bad thing. It could bring it up to date. You could really see a good version of Falcor. But as is true with all these kind of remakes and everything like that, there'll be naysayers. People say that it will ruin the mythology of the original. But the original will always be there. It's not going to destroy it. It's not going to push it out and say, I'm the new one. I'm new and shiny. Don't pay attention to that old dingy version. No, it's always going to be there. So what is wrong with making a remake of the Neverending Story? Fortunately, it doesn't hold up. But the movie is 36 years old. It's almost as old as I am. Sometimes movies, they come, they make their mark, and then they go. Some just do that. Some come, have awful sequels, and then go, like Neverending Story. But I'm just talking about the original. So I look at the Neverending Story much like I do a lot of films from that time and my childhood as a nostalgia act. You watch it not necessarily because it's a Oscar-winning movie, but because it's a walk down memory lane. And it makes you remember your childhood. It reminds you of the things that you liked as a child. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. Some people want to forget their childhood and don't want to watch these old movies. But that's, it's also a good thing to introduce them to the next generation. When my kids are old enough, I have no doubt we'll introduce them to the Neverending Story. Whether by then there'll be a remake, whether someone is going to watch this and think, oh, maybe we should do a remake of the Neverending Story. There might be a different version of it by the time my kids are old enough to watch and appreciate it. Who knows? But for the time being, when they're old enough, I will introduce them to the Neverending Story, because that's what it's there for. It's there to be watched. It's not there to be forgotten about. I do love this movie. It's always going to be a part of my childhood. It's one of my earliest films I remember watching on VHS, and it holds a very, very special place in my heart. Yes, the special effects weren't great, the story weren't great, some of the dialogue was cheesy, but it's a product of its time. It was made in the early 80s. So the standards of then compared to the standards of now, very, very different. Very, very different indeed. So it was kind of nice to have a walk down memory lane, go back to 1984, go back to the Neverending Story. It's a bit of a departure because I like to watch more recent films mostly, but sometimes, every now and then, instead of having to look forwards or keeping my feet in the present, I like to see what's been behind me as well, because sometimes the stuff behind is much better than the stuff that's coming. So keep watching it. I hope watching this makes you want to go and watch the Neverending Story. Whether you've seen it before or whether it's something that got under your radar. Go and watch it. It's great. Do not let the Neverending Story ever end. So, with all that being said, my name was Jay. And that was my opinion.